My name's Hannah. My contact info and whatnot are here. And also the web address for this presentation will be given at the end, so you don't need to, not that you would want to be furiously writing that down, but you don't need to be. I am a software developer. I'm an aging Generation X software developer who's probably been doing this a bit too long, increasingly older than my millennial coworkers. Yes, yes, okay. Age diversity. Sometimes I go by the handle Tech Girl Wonder, this is my silly little personal logo that you might see on the internet. It's the only good drawing I've ever done, so I use it a lot. So yay for rare artistic luck. Anyway, I work for a company called Carbon 5. We're a product development agency. We do boutique software development for all kinds of companies, from startups to Fortune 500s, and we love Elixir, and we're investing heavily in it. And that's the best I've ever done for our marketing spiel. And then lastly, just like one fun fact about me so that you feel like I'm someone trustworthy who you should listen to and absorb information. This is my dog, and she's really cute. So like, obviously I wouldn't be telling you lies. Anyway, so this talk begins with a sales pitch. And the sales pitch is about Erlang. It is a sales pitch, so bear with me. If it's a little bit glossy, you can come up after and dispute me on the facts. First of all, quick show of hands. How many of you guys know the relationship between Erlang and Elixir? Raise your hand if you feel like it. All right, now keep your hand up if you're willing to explain it to everyone else. Oh, wait, no, you were the last one. You got to go for it. How would you describe the relationship? Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so yeah, they both run on the same virtual machine, similar to the way that Scala and Java run on the same virtual machine. But Erlang is actually the original thing it was built for. It's the Java in this relationship, as opposed to the Scala. And then Elixir is a new thing that also compiles to the same virtual machine, but is newer and new syntax. Okay, so here's my sales pitch. Erlang is incredible, okay? And I'm going to tell you why Erlang is incredible. The reason Erlang is incredible is that concurrency sucks, okay? So Erlang, most of it, and any of you who've attempted to do concurrent programming in a traditional programming language like Java have had to deal with threads. If you program in Ruby, you probably never even attempted it. So yeah, it sucks. And so where most programming languages don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, Erlang is built from the ground up on this like core abstraction called the actor model, which is amazing. It's like the best for concurrency, and it's basically a way of modeling your program to make the complexity of concurrency not nearly the ball of hatred that it normally is. And bonus, Erlang models your programs as processes, like independent programs running. Your application is like a bunch of independent programs running on your computer, and it switches between them preemptively. It's like you have an entire operating system running your own application. It's amazing. So, possible alternative fact about Erlang, it is the best language for concurrency ever. There you go. Okay. But I want to tell you one more thing, and that is that scaling sucks. So scaling is really sucky, and you know why? Facebook, they employ about 500 developers. What do those developers do? They basically scale. I mean, maybe this is a stretch, but I feel like Facebook is like a simple Rails app, or actually a PHP app, that like a skilled dev team could like prototype in 2 days, and then you just have to scale it to 1 billion people, right? And you need 500 programmers to figure that out. Not easy to do. Well, here's the thing. Erlang is designed from the ground up to make scaling practically effortless. It's designed to essentially, once you've written your program, to be able to grow your program to run on, on bigger machines and more machines and across regions and whatnot. The thinking is built into the language, so it makes it practically effortless. So I want to tell you one more thing about why Erlang is amazing, and that is preventing crashes really sucks. And here's how I know. How much time do you spend trying to make sure your program doesn't crash, right? In a traditional programming language. And not only that, but how often are you actually successful 100% of the time, right? Probably, I'm going to go ahead and say, unless anybody here happens to be programming Jesus, that the number is 0. So Erlang has like a totally different approach. And they're like, it is impossible to actually write a program that never crashes. Uh-oh, sorry, hold on, my mic adjustment. So instead, we're going to take a different approach. We're going to allow parts of your program to crash. But the key thing is they're going to crash, but the whole application is not going to go down. And not only that, but we're going to give you all these tools to bring those things back up so that your application can continue to run, right? So that's pretty amazing. And all these amazing things, you might be saying, well, all right, well, show me the money. What are the results, right? So I don't know how many of you guys who are Elixir folks are aware of this, but Erlang was written in the 1980s. It was written to run systems that route telephone calls, right? How, when I call so-and-so, there's a million systems in between me and the person I'm calling that have to figure out how to get it to them, right? So they're called switches. And it was written to run on these switches for a Swedish company called Ericsson. And the initial software ran for about 20 years, and its uptime looked something like that. They said that this is a famous 7 nines statistic. Again, remember, this is a sales pitch, so if you all have disputes with that, feel free to talk to me afterwards. I'm not promising you that everything is exact in this portion of the talk. So, yeah, but it was like insanely high uptime. This is going to be awkward if this keeps happening. Anyway, that comes out to about, I think it's like a few minutes of downtime in 20 years or something like that. So less than a second. I'm sorry, less than a second. I got it wrong. Yeah. All right, let me give you another example. All right, how many of you guys have heard of a company called WhatsApp? Yes? All right, well, a bunch of you, whatever. This is an Erlang Elixir conference. Yeah, so anybody know how much that company was bought by Facebook recently, or not recently, a couple years ago? How much did they buy it for? $1 billion? A lot? $19 billion. Holy moly, that's a lot of money. How many total employees, not just devs, did WhatsApp employ at the time? 70? Yeah, I think I've heard 70 other words. I read 55 other places. In any case, it was certainly 2 digits, right? $19 billion company, 2-digit number of employees. Something like 30 maybe devs. 35? There you go. Yeah. So, okay, why isn't everyone writing everything in Erlang? Okay? I mean, like, come on. Who can argue with these results, right? All right, so the rest of the talk is trying to answer this question. Why isn't everyone writing Erlang? Okay? And this talk is called idea scaling. It's a talk about taking great ideas, like the ideas in Erlang, because I do believe there are really great ideas, and figuring out how to get everyone to adopt them, right? And how to get people to go for good ideas instead of bad ideas, which sometimes look a little bit easier initially. So let me give you a quick outline. The next part of the talk is a little bit of a story of how this talk came into being and answering the question, maybe why everyone isn't using Erlang yet. The second talk is looking at why this concept of adoption and idea scaling is really hard and alienates a lot of folks. The third is my solution. And my solution happens to come from my personal experience and my previous career as a community organizer. And I'll be talking about that. And then I'll be giving you what I would consider 3 core rules for how to take a great tech idea and bring it to everyone. And then finally, I have one more closing story at the end to kind of bring this all back together. So just to give you the outline. All right, so story. Once upon a time, about 6 months ago, actually, I gave a talk at a conference called Erlang Elixir Factory. It used to just be called the Erlang Factory. I got like a random solicitation for a talk. I submitted it. It got accepted. I didn't really know that much. I knew Elixir was in the title, but I didn't really know what I was getting into. And I went, and it was a little weird. It was wild. I was at a talk all of a sudden with tech luminaries. The person who made the actor model, who came up with it, was at the conference. And I was like trying to explain the actor model in my talk, which is a little bit scary. There were like Larry Wall, creator of Perl, was at the conference. It was like the age diversity of this conference was very different from what I'm used to. Went to ElixirConf, and it was like 22 to 30, and that was about it. Anyway, yeah, it was wild. And like, there was actually a lot of tie-dye. Like, I hadn't seen people wearing tie-dyed shirts in a while. That was exciting. Yeah, so it was really cool. I got a little bit like enraptured with this. And then I met this guy. His name is Joe Armstrong. He was at the conference, this like Erlang creator guy who came up with these amazing ideas. And he was about what you would expect. He had more amazing ideas. And he was just this like brilliant dude who had all these like, it seemed to be like a fountain, a spouting of like thoughts. And anyway, though, I was in this talk. Actually, the giver of the talk is in the room. And I asked this question at the end because they were talking about how like Elixir teaches you all these good practices. And I was like, oh, cool, that's wonderful. How do we get people to get into this? And it ended up in this debate between Dave Thomas and Joe Armstrong. And Joe Armstrong's take on adoption was this: the only way we judge anything is the property of its end result. Doesn't matter if it's hard, doesn't matter, we shouldn't even think about adoption. If the thing is beautiful, you build it, right? That is his thinking. So I was like, okay, all right, I'm starting to get where this guy is coming from, right? I went to this other talk, and it was the Joe Armstrong talk, and it was basically Joe Armstrong's list of amazing, crazy ideas that like you haven't even thought about. He was like talking about something about essentially making the entire World Wide Web verifiable and like private via like a digital hashing of all web addresses, using the blockchain somehow. I can't say that I really understood the implementation details. Anyway, it was like, I don't know, it was like super cool, except that I kept like, now this bug was like really bothering me of like, okay, that's cool, but like Google and Apple have like, tons and tons of money, and they don't really want the web to be private at all. So same with Facebook, right? So I was like, all right, and so the question and answer session came again, and I was like, all right, Joe Armstrong, so you have all these great ideas, and there are, but there's these people with lots and lots of money and tons of resources, and all these programmers who want to like do something totally different, who aren't interested in this all. So how these ideas would take thousands of programmers to do, and like how are we going to recruit all of them, and how is this going to happen, especially since all the programmers of today are like just trying to get a job. It's like the only job left that like is a middle-class job, and like everybody's just desperate for like a job, and I don't know. It went on for about a minute. By the way, never be me. That's called a faux question, I guess. It's when you like ask a question at the end of a talk that's really an opinion, and you really are clearly stating your own opinion. Anyway, Joe Armstrong's response to all of that, and let me see if I can play this, was this.
I don't think anybody can answer that question. I mean, you might be the last generation of programmers.
Okay.
Who knows?
That's it. I guess the answer is we're all going to be automated out of a job, so who knows? And I realized, that out of that, first of all, I just think Joe Armstrong is the coolest dude in the world. I'm like super fascinated with this guy. I hope none of this comes across as like in any way like dismissive of this dude who made this amazing technology. But I realized the problem was I was asking the question that is really more my area of expertise and something that I know something about, not because of any programming I've done, but because of what I used to do before I did programming. So essentially, to me, the reason, when you look at it, Erlang probably has not been adopted because the people who made Erlang are not interested in adoption, right? And oh, by the way, yeah, just don't be me. Like, don't ask questions like like that aren't questions that have opinions. Anyway, unless you want to use them in a talk like a few months later. So yeah, I mean, Erlang has issues. They're not like underlying architectural technical issues, but they're issues that make it hard for people to use. Things like true and false in Erlang, and I'm going to see if I get this right, are like atoms, just like any other atom. Like there's no unique thing about true or false, which is pretty wild to me. Like you model strings as a linked list of individual characters. Most computer programmers of the millennial generation, sorry, now I'm not going to make this blanket statement. A lot of folks who are programming today, who are coming in for very good reasons, not through like traditional computer science departments, may have never even heard of what a linked list is, right? So now you're going to tell them in order to use like do hello world and print the string hello world, you need to actually understand what a linked list is, right? So yeah, it's not that there's anything wrong with these, and I mean, if you've been programming since Prolog, I guess, in the 1970s, then Erlang probably makes lots of sense to you, right? Because that's what it is originally derived from. But for a new programmer, or even a programmer who's been only programming 5 to 10 years in the languages of the web, which have kind of developed a shared way of shared syntax to some extent, or at least a set of shared concepts, like it's going to be challenging. It's not made to adopt. It doesn't have really a package repository. It has basically the entire community has an emailing list, and you go to the email list if you have a question, or you want to find a library, or you want to do pretty much anything, and you argue with some of the greatest minds in computer science, and hopefully get your question answered, right? Like that's a challenging way to start programming. Anyway, so I started thinking about why Joe Armstrong might not be interested in this concept of adoption, and this concept of scaling the ideas of Erlang to everyone. And I thought about the way the conversation ended up getting framed, and it got framed in terms of selling. How do we sell this, right? And that's always what people say. Like adoption means, oh, you're going to go around and be like, this is the greatest thing. You should use it, right? So this concept. So when I talk about idea scaling, right? A lot of people, I'm sure, think they hear like, oh, you're going to tell us how to sell things, and that's not what I'm here to tell you to do, right? Because let's talk about what selling makes you think of, right? What do you think about when you think of selling, right? You think of this guy, right? Like I don't know, like if you're a computer programmer, let's just be real. A lot of folks were not like the alpha whatevers in high school, and like, you know, you associate selling with like the super cool guy who's like, hey, dude, like I got this great thing for you, and you have to get it right now, right? We are not Don. Most of us are not Don Draper or even Peggy Olson. So like it's kind of alienating. The other thing about selling is I think a lot of us like associate it with like inauthenticity, like these people, like these stock people, like you don't even know who they are. They're just like selling something. And the pitch that I gave you earlier, right? I mean, if there were things that were not true in it, like they were just like slightly off, there's nothing like a blatant lie in it, but you probably heard it and were like, what are you trying to sell me? What are you not telling me, right? So it creates a feeling of like, I don't know that I believe you, right? So I'm not here to teach you how to sell. You heard my best version of selling a few minutes ago. Basically, my only technique is to be really enthusiastic. I am not here to teach you how to sell. I'm here to teach you about something I know how to do, which is something called community organizing. So I had this whole other career before I was a developer where I worked as a so-called community organizer. And if I told you, fortunately, suddenly in 2008, our president was a community organizer. And then I just had an answer was, I do what Barack Obama used to do, but probably not nearly as well. Anyway, yeah, so I'm going to talk to you about what community organizers do. So community organizers are people who try to bring people together to make great ideas a reality, right? Community organizers are folks who specialize in trying to bring ideas into the world, right? Some of the ideas that community organizers tend to believe in are like bold statements that probably no one can disagree with on face, but are really hard to achieve. Like, no one should be homeless, right? No person should go hungry. No human being is illegal. So these are the ideas that community organizers want to bring into the world. And they also have another one, which is that regular people should have a say in the way society works. A lot of us think of our interactions with society in terms of just voting. And the community organizers believe that everyone should have a say in how things work. So just to be clear, community organizers are not people who like run a food bank. They're people who try to get a bunch of folks together to try to get a city government to put a food bank in a certain community where there's not access to food, right? Or not good access to healthy food. So that's what a community organizers do. They try to bring great ideas into the world by bringing people together. And there's a core principle that community organizers use, and that is that community organizers appeal to people's self-interest. So many of you may have like your activist friend in your life, right? Particularly in recent times when everyone's very aware of politics, right? And my guess is your activist friend, who you talk to a fair amount, is like does a lot of basically telling you what you should be doing, right? Like they show up and they're like, why aren't you at the protest, man? Like, what's up? You know, like, why aren't you doing something? It's crazy. You are too apathetic. You got to figure it out. You got to do this. So my guess is if somebody does that to you, your primary reaction was, no, I'll take a break. Can you just like tone it down? Like, I'm not interested, right? And the reason is that person is not appealing to your own interests. All of us have interests, self-interests, things that we want, right? Things that we want to see in the world, that we want to have in our lives. And there's nothing wrong with that self-interest, right? We need to learn how to, we need to figure out what people want, and we need to help them get it, right? What people want for their communities, for their families, all those types of things, right? And self-interest does not mean like selfish, right? Like it doesn't mean you're like appealing to only selfish instincts. A lot of folks are motivated by what you would call slightly unselfish instincts, like altruism, right? Some people derive satisfaction from being seen as respected in their communities, right? So you actually would appeal to that. You would say, listen, if you might encounter someone who actually has a fair amount of privilege in the world and say, listen, you need to give back. You need to do something, and I'm going to tell you what you need to do, and I've got all these people who are going to help you, figure out how to do this. So I started thinking about this frame and thinking about how it applies to this question of Erlang and Elixir. And part of the way I started thinking about it was thinking about the folks who created Erlang and have been doing Erlang for 20, 30 years, because it's been around a while, versus the interests of folks who are coming into programming, particularly junior developers today, right? So one thing I noticed about the Erlang community is that I would describe it as a generation of academic programmers, people who came of age at a time when programming was not so much a job as something you did as part of your studies at a university, right? It wasn't necessarily even in the private sector. It was it was in universities, which are a mix of public and private. But anyway, a lot of these folks are motivated by coming up with cool ideas. These are folks whose very job is to come up with ideas that no one has thought of, right? Not only that, but a lot of the folks who are from the Erlang community are of the sort of like 60s and 70s idealistic generation when they were really into crazy wild ideas, like the same, what Steve Jobs was in the late 70s when he was first creating Apple. It's going to change the world, right? And I actually think it's super appealing. I'm like really into this, like these folks are willing to think big and like come up with figure out how do we solve the big problems of the day, right? And a lot of their motivation is also among themselves. I want to, if I'm an academic, I want to show my other academic peers that I have something valuable to contribute, right? So they have a lot, and this is again generalization. I'm not saying that this applies to everyone, but this is in broad terms what I see as a lot of the Erlang folks' self-interest, right? Compare that to like where a lot of folks are coming into programming today, and specifically I mean within like the US, and also, I mean, folks are coming to programming now, I guess, and it could be US-centric, but also to some extent global. A lot of folks are coming into programming right now because jobs are like non-existent, right? All these former fields that used to have tons of jobs have either been automated away, or they're coming in because they want, or they've been moved out of the U.S. if you're in the U.S. In any case, it seems like the programming seems like a path to economic opportunity. If you've ever taught code school, it's not hard to tell that everyone is there because they want a good job, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? But your concerns are very different if that is your motivation. Your concerns, if you are a person who wants to break in this industry for your own economic self-sufficiency, are things like, what is going to teach me something so that I can show someone that I know how to do something right away so that I can get a job? Or once I get that first job, what is something that's going to give me the power to do something that's going to impress my first manager so that I'm going to stay in that job and then eventually become a senior developer, right? Those are key concerns, right? So I wanted to look essentially at the methods of community organizing and talk about it within the frame of Elixir, and how I think Elixir is actually an amazing, it's sort of like an implementation of a community organizing model to Erlang. I'll talk about the specifics of that and get into a couple of the details. I'm going to use these two models to start talking about how we scale ideas in any area, really. So community organizers have these three core principles for how we organize, how we go about doing community organizing and how we're successful, right? And so I'm going to talk about each of these, and I'm going to talk about how I see Elixir as, being super successful at some of this. The first rule of community organizing is you need to win concrete improvements in the lives of the folks you're organizing. It means that, like, if your goal is to make sure that every child in your city gets a K-12 education, and it's really effective and has great schools with small classrooms and like great teachers in it, like, you're not going to win that right now, right? You're going to have to organize for a long time, right? But you need, as you go, to be doing something that provides like immediate wins for the folks who you're organizing, right? And so I would argue that Elixir is great at this, right? So here's the thing. Here are the things that I see for that essentially mean that Elixir gives you these sort of like concrete wins. So Elixir is like super productive out of the box, I think. I mean, comparatively, certainly as compared to Erlang on its own, right? Elixir gives you all the tools that you might expect in a lot of like very beginner-friendly languages. You get a package manager. You get a sort of like pre-made, I don't know what you call mix, a build tool, right? You have a framework, a web framework, which is what a lot of folks are doing when they first come into programming. You can do things right away, right? If you're coming from if you've only been programming in, say, Ruby on Rails for a year, you could come to Elixir and maybe in a couple months you could be productive, right? That's pretty cool. But it also gives you a little bit of a win, right? If you're coming from from any of the sort of like popular web languages, PHP, Python, Ruby, even if you do not improve your programming practice, your program is probably going to be a little bit faster out of the box, right? You're gonna immediately get a small win, and you might be like, look, I knew how to do this, and now, and show it to whomever your company and be like, wow, you made that thing much faster, right? Like, that could be super valuable. The other thing, the second rule of community organizing is you need to give people a sense of their own power. A lot of folks in this society feel like they have no say, right? Like, you get to, it's just, I got to go to my job, I got to do, try to take care of my family, all that type of stuff. And in reality, and part of the goal of community organizing is to actually make people rethink that, to stop thinking about what they have a say on as just maybe going to the ballot box once every year, once every 4 years, and instead start thinking about how they can get involved, and they might have a voice. So you might take someone who's never been to City Hall before, and you might take them to a meeting with their city council person. And it definitely takes a lot of coaching and figuring out how, how they're going to be effective in their communication. But a lot of times people walk away from that saying, I never thought that I could do that, right? So it's about giving people a sense of their own power. And so the way I see that Elixir does that is, first of all, it clears out the Erlang cruft, right? I mean, actually, this is not a critique of Erlang syntax, to be clear, right? It's more about making less obstacles for someone to start working, right? So you have a sense, as soon as you start Elixir, that you're able to do stuff, right? And then you get all the tools. You get a package manager. You've got, you've got all these, you immediately are powerful. But then the cool thing is, I find this fascinating about Phoenix. Phoenix uses underlying Erlang technologies in the context of channels and in the context of presence that allow you to do things you could have never done in maybe a traditional programming language web framework. So that's amazing, right? You have this sense of like, oh my God, there's something here that like I could do a whole lot with, right? The other thing, the final rule of community organizing is you have to build organizations. You have to bring people together and build your power over the long term so that you can continue to have shape policy, right? So I would argue that most ideas live in communities. Many of the ideas that you use today in programming, you adopted because the person who you respected presented the idea to you, right? I think about the Ruby community, which has been really good at this, that like they bring folks together and you have this sense of like we're all learning this together. And I think that Elixir is doing that too. There was a great talk earlier today on Elixir Bridge, which is a great way of creating community around it. Elixir is really like already in the sort of open source world, right? And where it's a very open, let's help folks learn approach, right? So that's really cool. Community organizers ultimately like deal with relationships. Your first, folks you organize are folks that are already in your network. That's who you call. And there are some key practices that they use to maintain those relationships. So basically, to build that kind of network over time, this might fall into the general category of like life advice. I'm not even sure if this is about community organizing, but one of the ones that I really love is learning to meet people where they're at. Instead of trying to be like, all right, I'm going to, tell you all the things that's got to change about society right now, man, society. But that's, stereotype. Anyway, you find out where someone's at. What is their thinking right now? And you try to take it a little bit farther. And I find this is a real relief when I think about programming. I've been programming for a while, and I've occasionally found myself becoming the person I hate, which is the person who looks at a bunch of code and is like, that's wrong, that's wrong. Oh my God, I can't believe that. Oh, there's so much wrong here. I can't even look at this, right? Well, so the meeting people where they're at means saying, listen, I don't need you to get it all right now, but I'm going to show you one thing you could be doing better. I'm going to teach you how to write a test, right? You could be testing, even if, like, yeah, we also got to work on a whole bunch of other things, right? So I think that's really cool. Another is, like, keeping a sustaining approach to your relationships. This is really life advice stuff. But I mean, like, I would argue that maybe, like, Rails got super popular because David Heinemeier Hansson was a great, abrasive, disruptive dude who would just be like, that sucks, and like, Rails is so much better. But I think in the long term, it didn't help, right? Because at some point, Rails hit a popularity kind of peak, and like the dude stopped seeming so like new and cool, and as a result, I think people were like, all right, well, we're going to move on, right? And as a result, I feel like Rails maybe ended its glory a little bit earlier than it could have, right? So keep sustaining your approach. Relationships matter over the long term. And that's the last thing, which is that you got to look at the long term, right? The long term is, you don't win anything quick. I used to organize trans folk in LA, and it used to be that the LA then gay and lesbian center didn't offer any services to transgender people, right? And we started this campaign where we were trying to get them to open a health clinic for trans folks. And it took years, and they finally opened it, right? And that started serving trans folks, and now it serves 300 people a month in LA, right? And meanwhile, as a result of that, they did all this cultural competency training, and they started doing trans services in a bunch of places, and it's one of their biggest sources of grants now. They have a little bit of a financial motive for it. And now they are the LA LGBT Center, and that took 10 years, right? But then I encountered this trans person who was like, yeah, man, I just came out, and I went to the center, and like I got a name change, I got my hormones, I got therapy, but I don't know, it wasn't that great. And I was like, holy moly, you got all these things that didn't used to exist. I came out as trans a long time ago. So anyway, that's the story there. But I want to end with like a story that's a little closer to home. And this is one last story. Once upon a time, 1990s this time. I don't know how many of you guys were using computers in the 1990s. Most of them ran this terrible operating system called Windows. It's gotten better since then, but like it was Windows 95 or Windows 3.1, and like you would see things like this. Basically, like if your program crashed, your whole computer crashed. It was a terrible piece of software, and it felt like there was nothing you could do about it. Oh, and then like Netscape came out, and it was like, oh, great, like you know, we're going to be able to use, we're going to beat Microsoft to the web. But then immediately Internet Explorer came out and took over. It was like super hopeless. And if you had asked me in 1996 if these would be the dominant platform for computing forever, I would have said, yeah, sure. I am 100% sure about it. But so then there was this guy, right? And he was like, I'm going to write an open source operating system. And he didn't write a great open source operating system. He wrote a little proof of concept. The original release of Linux said, if you can build this, props to you, right? Like it was not a great, he was not a magical product, right? But he had this idea that instead of like telling people how to build this software, he would just welcome everyone in, right? And let them start building the software. And as a result, it progressed rapidly. And there was someone who was watching that and said, whoa, there's a crazy idea in here. I'm actually going to codify this idea. And they wrote this essay called The Cathedral and the Bazaar, talking about these two different models of software development, the old one being the cathedral, where the wizards went off into the cathedral and built their software and finally came out 10 years later, and people were like, oh, okay, it doesn't work, but you guys know. So versus this bazaar, which is like, you're going to have a whole bunch of developers. They're working on this code together. They're disparate. The code's all out in the open. They're all doing their own thing, but somehow it comes together, right? And that was the philosophy of open source. And so then there were these folks who read the essay, and they were like, whoa, these ideas are crazy. What if we brought that to our own commercial software? And that company was a company called Netscape. They made a product called Netscape Communicator. And they did something that had never been done before. They said, you know what? We could take the source code for this product, and we could open it up to the world. This is a commercial product worth millions of dollars. Everyone probably said they were, I don't know if anyone said they were crazy. But anyway, they decided to release it. And so I'm going to end with this super cool video, which is a video that is on the internet of the release of the source code for Netscape Communicator, which is now known as Mozilla. So, and it's also very 90s, which is part of why I love it.
Yeah, it's 5 to 10.
Woo!
So
This is them like on their way
Welcome
to release
everybody
the
to the
software.
conference call. Thanks for joining us this morning. Today, Netscape announced that the first developer release of its Communicator 5.0 source code is available for download from the Mozilla.org website.
Meeting. This is them being late.
You know where Tara is, right?
it's
You go.
second floor?
Yeah, it's the first floor, like way on the other side.
And then today, on the end of March, as we announced, we are pushing the code out to the web, as they say, and we're delighted to be part of
This
it,
is
and
your
we're very
classic
excited to
90s
see
tech
what happens.
executive.
The good news is the marathoner is now coming into town with that bomb on his back, and it looks like he's going to make it.
The dude with the blue hair is a guy named Jamie Zelinsky. My favorite part about this
They
is
don't
like how
have a
90s
theoretical
this dude
framework
looks. He
to
looks
write
like
software.
he's meant to be
They're
in
just
the
writing
Matrix.
it.
So anyway.
It's just like hitting the baseball. If their code gets a home run, nobody's asking questions. Well, this doesn't make sense, or why do you do that? Why does it work? Nobody cares why it works.
You're not noticing anything,
This is bad.
What's that?
Well,
It's not connected to...
the machine that controls the FTP push is like not answering.
Is it loaded?
Awkward.
It's blast,
Awkward.
not blash.
Oh,
Yeah, maybe good reason
Beep it.
not to.
Oh. That pin, yeah.
Duh.
Okay.
We're up.
Okay. Yay.
It's super.
Mac's there.
Unix is there. Windows is there.
We're done.
We're done. It's up.
We're done.
This is the after party. Apparently my CEO for the company I work for was at this after party.
Since Jamie is here, I'm told that means that we have now pushed the source out on the net. Is that correct?
Actually, we decided
Out
not
on
to.
the net.
Any funny?
It was just a stupid idea.
That's our story and we're sticking to it.
Yay. So that is how we got Mozilla, and now the majority of the world's operating
For a
systems
moment,
and browsers
everyone at Net
run on open source software. So it's pretty cool. That's the URL for this presentation. I need to push the presentation one more time because I was just finishing it up, but you can get it there. That's it. Cool. Sorry for going over. We have like no time for questions, I believe. Yes? No? I mean, there's a keynote at 5. I mean, you're welcome to ask me questions, but I would go hear Chris McCord.